Alright, hey everybody. So today I'm going to be going a little in depth on the first Hearthstone in the Works update. This is from September 18th, which is today while that I'm recording this video. And this is going to be, I'm just recording this on OBS via my webcam and my microphone, so it's going to be unedited. So I apologize if the quality is not the best it could be, but this is going to be just one take, so I apologize if I misspeak or say something that's not entirely correct, so you can correct me in the comments if I do that. And I'm not going to be going over I'm not going to be reading everything verbatim. I'm just going to be highlighting some of the talking points in here, because there's been a lot of talk, at least within my sphere in Hearthstone, about each of these points and what they mean for the game and all that kind of stuff. So the first point that they make is called State of the Meta, and I'm also going to link this article in the description. So if you haven't read it, click on the link, either go read it or follow along while I'm talking about it, and formulate your own opinions. So the first one is State of the Meta, and basically what it's saying is the meta is very stable, and they're happy with the diversity of decks that people can play on ladder and in tournaments, and I think that is a pretty reasonable statement. What I see people talking about on Twitter is a lot of that the format doesn't feel very fun, because you have to play on ladder. Matchups can be quite polarizing, and that sucks when you're playing on ladder, because if you're playing a deck with polarized matchups, let's say Odd Warrior, for instance, and you play against Odd Rogue, Odd Paladin, those kinds of things where you have good matchups, that can feel awesome, because you're just gaining stars and you're actually making progression towards whatever goal you have. But then it also has matchups like against Quest Rogue, where it's incredibly difficult to win, and it feels really, really bad to play those kind of decks. So if people enjoy those kinds of strategies, like control or anti-control or aggro, each deck has multiple different counters that exist. So running into those counters feels bad, and running into somewhat soft counters, say matchups that are 40%, 60% in your opponent's favor, can feel bad too, because you'll lose those around 6 out of 10 times. So if you're just getting unlucky on the side of variance and losing those, then that feels really bad. But the truth is that class diversity is at one of the all-time highs I've ever seen it at. I think I just checked HS Replay, and their tracker, I'm actually pulling it up right now, it had almost every class at close to 50%. Yeah, Hunter 51.8, Warlock, basically Paladin, Druid, Warlock, Hunter, all slightly above 50%. They're between 50 and 52% in terms of their win rate. And then Warrior through Rogue is all 48 up to 49.4 in Warrior's case. Priest is the outlier, which is at 45% as of right now. But even then, that still has some archetypes that you can play if you're a Priest specialist and really dedicated to the class, which I think is important in laddering, in the ladder environment in general, is to have decks that anybody can play for any class and expect a reasonable amount of success, which is where we're at right now. That's just the case. You can take any class to high legend ranks if you're dedicated to it and you play enough games and you tune the deck well and you play it well. You can play pretty much any class. And it's just the polarization that gets to some people, and it's really hard to divorce yourself from those emotions of frustration when you're not climbing a ladder with an archetype that you enjoy. But yeah, basically the main point is class diversity is very high right now, and that's just an indisputable fact. Like class diversity and then archetype diversity within each class. Each class has multiple different archetypes you can play to reasonable success. Let's see if I have any other talking points here. I don't think so. So we'll move on to the cards to watch section. And this mostly just says, look, we know Giggling Inventor's powerful, and we know it's pretty ubiquitous, but we're not nerfing it. And the reasons they give, I actually agree with a lot. on the podcast. I'm on the Coin Concede podcast, for those of you who don't know. The link to that will also be in the description. But on the podcast, we've been talking about this for a couple weeks, is that Giggling Inventor feels really strong. Excuse me. But it feels really strong because it just shows up everywhere, and I'll actually get into that a little bit later. But it's really definitely towing the line between being just really widely played and too powerful. So their reasoning, or some of the things they say in here, is we intended for Giggling Inventor to be powerful because we found that having powerful neutral taunt minions tends to make games more interesting. And I agree with that completely. I think having powerful neutral taunt minions and powerful neutral defensive options is really good for a healthy environment in general, so people don't get just completely run over by aggro decks whenever they're strong. And this gives Control some really easily accessible tools regardless of what class you're playing. So it's a nice little just card that people have access to in theory. And then another line in here is we've seen that with cards like Sludge Belcher and Tark Reaper in the past, cards that fulfill this role need to be strong to get that job done, but there's a line where they might be too good. So here, they're recognizing that Giggling Inventor may be a little too pushed. But they also bring up Tark Reaper and Sludge Belcher, which also feel pretty strong. Tark Reaper less so, because it's not good on offense, really, but its stats are fairly pushed. And I think the closest parallel that we have to Giggling Inventor is Sludge Belcher, in that it's a powerful 5-drop defensive taunt minion that's hard to interact with on a 1-for-1 basis. And Giggling Inventor is clearly towing the line, and due to this section, like reading this section, it is very, very obvious that they're aware of that, and they're eyeing it, but they don't think it's just a break glass, in case of emergency, panic, sky's falling, Giggling Inventor's too good. They think it's just something to keep an eye on, and I actually agree after thinking about this a little more in the day. I was on the side of nerfing Giggling up to 6 when we've talked about it on the podcast, but after thinking about this, I've cooled off a little bit on that idea. And one of the biggest arguments I've had and also have heard for its nerf is that it's one of the only new cards from Boomsday to show up in decks now. And this shouldn't be looked at as a slight against Giggling Inventor, but it should be a reiteration and a focus on how strong the past few sets have been, just as a whole. Boomsday was part of the new approach that Witchwood brought, in that it wants to have powered down cards and focus more on interaction with your opponent as opposed to singular cards being the reason that you win the game, and I'll get into that. So Ungoro brought Quest with it, as well as strong toolbox cards like Arcanologist, Shadow Visions, those kinds of things, and they brought seriously pushed minions. Crackling Razormaw comes up, Vile Spine Slayer comes up as one. There's a bunch of different examples, but these are cards that when you draw them, feels like you gain a massive advantage, or in the Quest case, sometimes your archetype just can't actually beat that. Knights of the Frozen Throne brought us Death Knights, which single-handedly define a variety of archetypes, as well as the best 2-drop and 8-drop in the game, Prince Keleseth and the Lich King. It also brought us Spreading Plague and Ultimate Infestation, which we see in nearly every Druid deck on ladder, except for Taunt Druid, and even then sometimes we see Spreading Plague because the card's just nuts. Kobolds and Catacombs brought us Carnivorous Cube, Fungomancer, Recruit as a whole, including the already nerfed Possessed Lackey and Called Arms, and Legendary Weapons, Spellstones, Branching Paths, Sonya Shadow Dancer, and the list can just keep going. The Witchwood was powered down for the most part, which signaled a long-term game plan and design philosophy from Blizzard, which means that once this next rotation happens, the standard environment is going to be a much less powerful one with more important micro decisions and less cards that allow you to just either win the game on the spot or just have a serious advantage when you play them. The real cards up for contention, I think, as problems would be Gen, Baku, and Shudderwock, but those are fairly tame compared to what we've been used to for the past year or so. So when we're actually comparing cards that need to be nerfed, we have to compare Giggling against all of these other busted cards in the standard environment right now. Is Giggling actually the problem, or is the meta just so powerful that Giggling is the only card from the new set that can compete? Because they've said they want it to be really powerful. So if this is going to be one of the most powerful cards out of the new set, and it's the only one seeing play, is it really busted, or is it just strong enough to be able to compete in this already really, really strong environment? So that's what I think it is that it's probably the strongest neutral 5-drop in Standard, but that's the point of it. They wanted another Sludge Belcher, and that's what we have, but I think that's why we're not seeing more Boomsday cards, is because the set overall was powered down. So most of it just can't compete with Kobold and Catacombs, Ungoro, Knights of the Frozen Throne. Those past sets, they can't really compete with that, except for Giggling Inventor. And I don't think Giggling Inventor is a problem there. I think it's just the design philosophy of the past year. So they're really looking at Giggling Inventor as a long-term approach in, would it be better to have Giggling Inventor be 5 mana post-rotation, or would it be better to address it? And I think they're erring on the side of having us basically have a Sludge Belcher post-rotation for decks to have access to, even though it appears to be a problem because it's the only Boomsday card. Well, that's one of the reasons, because it's one of the only Boomsday cards seeing play. But again, I think that's more of a symptom rather than the cause. And then the next section is Wild Balance. I don't play nearly as much Wild as I used to, so I'm only going to briefly touch on this. I don't want to act like I'm some Wild expert. I've hit Legendary, I think, twice. So I'm kind of removed from the format a little bit, other than just vicariously living through other people. Personally, I think Juicy Psych Melon is a bit of a problem, but I also think it makes for interesting games. I think it makes for interesting deck building decisions for decks trying to compete against it. Like, we're seeing a real rise in Reno Lock decks and decks that can play Dirty Rat, Demonic Projects, Death Lords, those kind of cards, to combat those kind of combos, but it also feels really bad to lose against if you're not playing that. And it feels like the dichotomy of the format is it's really split down the middle in Psych Melon decks and decks trying to beat those, and then everything else is just worse. So that's kind of a problem, but Blizzard looks like it's trying to take an approach in Wild that they don't want to tinker with it as much. They're trying to figure out how they want Wild to be. They're not sure if they want it to be just the greatest hits from Standard past and see how all that just functions together and see how broken things get, or if they're trying to take an approach where they just meddle in the format and they micromanage every card that may be a little too strong. I think they're really trying to take an approach where they're factoring in the growth and health of the format overall, and to do that they have to figure out what they want the format actually to be. So we're kind of stuck in this weird limbo spot right now. The next section is the new classic cards, and these aren't meant to be powerful at all, and they're just not, but they're meant to be an introduction to new players about what these classes are about. And we only see these classes because they're just replacing Ice Block, Ice Lance, Power Overwhelming, and Conceal from Mage, Warlock, and Rogue. So that's why we see these numbers of cards. They're just an introduction to new players. Like, Warlock's about demons, so the spell adds a random demon. Mage is about spells and killing minions and freezing things. And then Rogue's not really about stealing cards from your opponent, but they kind of want it to be. So yeah, these are just nice little replacements for cards they've Hall of Famed, which is nice. The next section is about new player experience improvements, which I think is generally accepted as the best part of this article. So what they're doing is they're introducing ranks below 25, rank 50 to 26, and that's only for new players to play in. The only thing that I think there may be some concern about is how many stars each rank will be, because having 5 stars from rank 50 to rank 26 would be just awful and feel like a real tedious grind for new players. So I would assume that there would be 2 stars or maybe even 1 star for each rank. But these are specifically for brand new players, so They don't just jump into ranked after playing with their basic mage deck and casual for a little bit and then get queued up against a golden Q block from someone who hasn't played in a few months and who's just decayed a bunch. So it's really nice for the new player experience. And I think one of the hidden gems here in this section for experienced players already is the option to skip the new player experience when you make a new account, so you don't have to go through the intro flow of the game and go through all the little battles between AI and all that stuff. So that's a nice little update that people have been asking for some time. And then we get into the real meat of this update article, which is the in-game tournament updates, which is what people seem to be most upset about. And even though this is the most, what's the word I'm looking for? Controversial. Even though this is the most controversial section of this update, I'm not going to touch on it that much because I don't know what's going on behind the scenes. But I'm going to theorize. So basically, tournament mode is on hiatus for the time being. We were told that it would get released sometime this year, but they said, let me find the quote, instead of broadening Hearthstone with an exciting new way to play, it felt tacked on and wasn't integrating well into the larger Hearthstone experience. Which, this sentence right here, even though I am kind of sad that they don't have a date for tournament mode and it's suspended right now indefinitely, that gives me hope for what tournament mode could be in the future. So I am with the majority of the community in wanting a tournament mode, and I've been pretty vocal about it on the podcast before, but I don't want it to be, also excuse the profanity in this section, because there will be a little bit. So I don't want it to be some half-ass thing. I want it to be done right. I don't want it to be just bullshit thrown out there that you can only play in firesides or something. I want you to be able to play it from home. I want you to be able to play in tournaments, play Swiss rounds, play double limb, play Conquest, Last Year Standing, whatever. I think many people have a vision like that for tournament mode, and it sounds like what they were doing wasn't that, which really sucks that they're putting it on the back burner, basically. They're just putting a pin in it for now and scrapping what they had before. But how they phrased it makes it seem as if their focus was completely off base with what feedback was. So now they can kind of start restructuring it in how the community wants it, which is what I think what they should have been doing in the first place, but it obviously wasn't. So a parallel that I can draw here is if you had an expectation for a movie and they had a deadline for it, or a release date, say August 29th, a movie was supposed to come out, and it came to be leading up to that release date, and the studio wasn't ready to release it, they have two options. They can, one, continue in post-production and make it better and edit it and get the CGI and stuff already, or they can release a non-polished product and have it be straight-up bullshit and tank at the box office, which seems to be what Blizzard is kind of approaching this as, is they don't want to push out something that's completely heinous and just completely not what the community wants, because that will push people away from the game to be waiting for this long to come out with something that's just completely not in line with what people are actually wanting. That would push competitors away from the game. And this is going to be my conspiracy section of this video. So what I think, the timing here is a little weird, because Artifacts Beta is coming out in a month, and they have announced, I believe, that they will have a tournament mode in their client, which I think Hearthstone will take a look at and kind of assess people's feedback to that. And I'm not going to say they're looking to structure it off of that, but I think they want to see how a tournament mode is built in a similar environment and see the pros and cons of it, because Hearthstone has been about a polished client basically since its inception. That's one of the most important things to Team 5. And I think they really want to push out something polished and something that is going to live up to players' expectations. So right now, we're in a waiting period, basically, where we're waiting for a new announcement on a new tournament mode, and I'm sure that'll be a while, but I think it's better to wait for an actual good product than have them stick to their word about it coming out this year and have it just be straight up horseshit. I think it's just going to be better in the long run, which seems like a lot of what this article is about, is looking at things in a broad, long run, like long-term health of the game view, which I think is great for just moving forward. And honestly, the responses I've seen to this article have been just filled with emotional charge and just vitriol, without people actually taking a step back and looking at what this means in terms of the bigger picture of Hearthstone. The truth is, the metagame may not be too fun or enjoyable right now to some people, and it's going to stay that way until rotation, just due to the sheer power level of the sets, like I talked about. But after rotation, and after they actually get a tournament mode, and after it actually drops, I am positive that we will be in for a very healthy environment, because Hearthstone is still in its infancy as a game and has a ton of space to grow. So instead of having knee-jerk reactions to how the community is feeling on any given day, Blizzard looks at taking a big-picture approach and is really focused on long-term health of the game as opposed to short-term appeasement of players. And a lot of what I've seen on Twitter, honestly, I can understand people's emotions, and I'm not trying to tell anybody they shouldn't feel a certain way. But I think some of the reactions I've seen have been really immature. Like, I'm leaving the game, Artifact's coming out, we're leaving for Artifact. Like, people have said the same thing about Elder Scrolls Legends Gwent. They're saying that about Artifact now. I mean, it's just nonsense, honestly. This update is not what we wanted to see as a community, but the sky is not falling, and it is not nearly as bad as I believe most people are making it out to be. I think it's honestly very smart on their end, and I think it represents, honestly, a good direction that Hearthstone's going. And I know I'm in the minority there from what I've seen, so I wanted to make this video and kind of explain my thoughts and explain why I think Hearthstone's heading in a positive direction, despite us not getting tournament mode, basically. So, yeah, you can find me on social media and stuff. I'll post my links to wherever I am in the description of this video. So, thanks for watching, and I guess tell me how what your thoughts are on my analysis of this, and tell me why I'm an idiot or why you agree with me or whatever. So, all right, take care.